January 2016. Wind from the Atlantic howled through the bare branches of the Ipswich forest, carrying a bone-chilling cold and the pungent smell of sea salt. Thick fog enveloped the snow-covered hills, and Detective Ryan Price's flashlight tore through that white veil, shining down on a patch of frozen ground. "Central, I need forensic support immediately." His voice crackled over the radio, hoarse and slightly trembling. What had started as a routine crime scene check, based on the suspect's statement, had now become a discovery that no one on the team dared to breathe heavily about, because they were standing before something that Gloucester had been searching for in 34 years of silence. The wind whipped at the yellow police tape, snowflakes drifting around the headlights. Ryan crouched down, his gloved hand touching the freshly turned hard soil, where the light reflected off a small sparkling object. Something he knew he'd seen somewhere in the old files. A brief moment, but enough to make his heart stop. He took a deep breath, stepped back, and let the forensics team move in. Gloucester, the small coastal city with salt-dampened red roofs, was about to face its own ghost. 34 years earlier, in the winter of 1982, Sarah Whitmore, 18 years old, left the Christmas choir at St. Anne's Church. She was wearing a gray sweater, carrying a gift box for her mother, and said she would stop by Cape Ann Mall to pick up a few things. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. That night, snow fell heavily, and the next morning, people only found her bronze Ford Pinto in the Magnolia Woods. Driver's door open, interior light still on, and a small streak of blood on the driver's seat. No signs of a struggle, no witnesses, just an eerie void in the white snow. Gloucester had lived with the unanswered question ever since. Where did that girl go? For years, the case was sealed in the Essex County Archives, along with a blood vial labeled in the shaky handwriting of Detective Paul Hensley, Ryan's father. A small drop of blood, seemingly meaningless, lay silent in the darkness, until new technology emerged, and a new generation of Gloucester police began reopening the files. They didn't know that this journey would lead them to a seemingly ordinary man who had lived among them, greeted them every morning, and carried a deadly secret within him. Before continuing this shocking story, please hit subscribe and like the video, because your support helps us bring cases buried by time back into the light, and ensures you don't miss any justice journeys. Tonight, we'll go back to the winter of 1982, trace the trail of the disappearance that left Gloucester with a wound that never healed, and discover how a tiny drop of blood could break the silence of 3 decades. This is a story of loss, of faith that refuses to die, and of justice delayed, but never denied. December 1982, Gloucester, Massachusetts. The coastal town was plunged into biting cold. Wind from the Atlantic rushed through the dark wooden houses, whistling into the narrow, salt fog-covered alleys. At the harbor, fishing boats lay anchored, silently rocking under the thick fog. Inside St. Anne's Church, golden candlelight flickered amid the choir singing Silent Night. Sarah Whitmore, 18 years old, stood in the front row, her clear voice ringing out beneath the cold stone arches. She was a senior at Gloucester High, the youngest daughter of a family living on Maplewood Street. When the choir ended, people flooded out, their breaths turning to white vapor. Sarah pulled on her gray sweater, put on her knit hat, said goodbye to friends, and said she would stop by Cape Ann Mall to buy a Christmas gift for her mother, and then head straight home. A friend remembered seeing her hurry through the snow, her shoes leaving small footprints leading to the bronze Ford Pinto. She started the car, the headlights cutting through the fog, reflecting off the wet road. The car pulled out of the parking lot, vanishing at the curve toward the coastal highway. Offshore, the wind blew stronger, the smell of salt and cold snow flooding the city. Houses turned off their lights early. Inside the small Whitmore family home, the wall clock ticked toward midnight. Margaret Whitmore, Sarah's mother, still sat by the window. The teacup on the table had gone cold, and there were no more car sounds outside. She looked out at the thick snow covering the porch steps and told herself her daughter was probably almost home. At 12:30, she stepped out onto the porch, scanned the quiet street, seeing only a distant yellow light at the corner. At 1 a.m., the house fell into absolute silence. No car sounds, no door opening, no calls. Margaret picked up the phone and dialed a few of Sarah's friends, each one answering the same. She left the choir early, said she was heading home. Worry filled the small room. She turned to look at the wall clock again, the minute hand just touching the 12. Her hand trembled as she lifted the receiver. The police dispatcher's voice came on the line, steady and distant. She took a deep breath, tried to stay calm, spoke slowly but choked up. My daughter hasn't come home. She left this evening and hasn't returned yet. The dispatcher's voice remained steady on the phone as Margaret tried to keep calm to repeat every detail. She left the church around 9:30. She said she would stop by the mall and come right back. I haven't heard anything since. At the other end, the night shift officer asked a few more questions, then promised to send someone first thing in the morning. When she hung up, the house fell into an eerie silence. Outside, wind from the sea rattled the window frames, carrying a piercing whistle. As dawn broke, 2 patrol cars rolled into Maplewood Street. Streetlights still glowed dimly. Gloucester seemed frozen in the fog. A young officer knocked on the Whitmore door, announcing that investigators had been dispatched. Detective Paul Hensley, the tall man in a thick sweater, appeared on the porch with a worn notebook. He introduced himself briefly, asked Margaret one last time about the time, where Sarah was headed, and anyone she might have met. The mother answered haltingly, her hands clutching the cold teacup tightly. Hensley stood, scanned the small room. Everything was neat. No sign she had planned to run away. A photo of Sarah in choir uniform sat on the piano, her radiant smile under the church lights. He nodded slightly, then stepped onto the porch, where the cold wind lashed his face. He signaled the officer to follow, start at the church, then the mall. They drove through the empty coastal roads, fresh snow still unmarred by traffic. St. Anne's Church emerged from the fog. Main doors locked, only faint old footprints trailing toward the parking lot. Hensley walked along the fence, bent down to examine the snow. No signs except chaotic boot prints from the night before. With fog this thick and wind this strong, he said. A few hours, and everything vanishes. From the church, he drove on to Cape Ann Mall, where Sarah said she would stop. The vast parking lot was empty, only old tire tracks blurred by frost. A snowplow worker who arrived early said no one stayed after closing the night before. Hensley asked if he'd seen a bronze Ford Pinto. The man shook his head. Lots of cars here I don't remember. Inside the mall, stores were still closed, only yellow light spilling from the gift shop windows. On the way back to the station, Hensley stopped by the sea. Thick fog hid the anchored boats offshore. He stood silent for a long time, then murmured, "She didn't just disappear. Someone picked her up." That was his first instinct, and it would guide him for more than 3 decades to come. Back at the Whitmore home that afternoon, Margaret still sat waiting for news. "Can you give us Sarah's most recent photo?" Hensley asked, his voice low. She brought out a frame from Good Harbor Beach the previous summer. The girl standing before the waves, brown hair blowing in the wind. He took the photo, studied it closely, then carefully tucked it into his coat pocket. "We'll start right away," he said, "and we won't stop until we find her." As Hensley left, snow began falling again, small flakes quietly covering the police car roof. He didn't know that a few miles south, in the misty Magnolia Woods, Sarah's Ford Pinto lay still under the white frost, waiting to be found. The next morning, December 23, 1982, Gloucester was still shrouded in thick fog, rolling in from the sea. Temperatures dropped, roads iced over, pine branches in the Magnolia Woods sagging under snow. The search team mobilized at dawn, split into 3 groups heading southwest, where Detective Paul Hensley had marked the night before on the map. He believed Sarah couldn't have gone far. If abducted, the perpetrator was likely still in the area. Around 9 a.m., A call crackled over the radio, the young officer's hoarse voice. Vehicle found at Magnolia Point Trail, over a mile from the main road. Hensley and his partner whipped the car around, warning lights flashing through the fog. The path into the woods was narrow and rutted, police tires crunching over frozen snow. When they stopped, a small clearing appeared amid the trees, where a bronze Ford Pinto sat tilted, right front wheel half buried in snow. The driver's door was ajar. The interior light glowed faintly, pale yellow spilling into the fog like a lost lantern. No signs of collision or accident. Hensley approached slowly, boots sinking into deep snow. He paused at the door, eyes scanning the cab quickly. The driver's seat was empty. The passenger seat held a gray sweater folded hastily, sleeve dusted white. On the floor, a few receipts and a ballpoint pen scattered with wet snowflakes. "Kill the power first," he said quietly. The accompanying officer leaned in, pulled the key from the ignition. The light went out, the cab plunging into shadow. Hensley leaned closer on the gear shift. A small dried blood streak, dark and thin as a fingertip. He signaled the note-taker. "Mark it, don't touch." About 5 meters from the car, a dark object stood out against the snow. An officer bent to pick it up. It was Sarah's purse, strap broken, inside still holding wallet. Lipstick, Idaho. No money missing, no valuables taken. Hensley carefully surveyed the surroundings. Bushes parted to the sides, faint boot prints leading toward a small path out to the highway. The prints deeper than a woman's step, large style, possibly work boots. He pulled out a measuring tape, gauged the stride distance in the snow, about 48 inches, long and even. "Male, strong build," he said, voice low. "Looks like he dragged her out of the car." But only a short stretch before the tracks vanished completely, buried by last night's snow. A tow truck was called. While waiting, Hensley stood a few paces from the scene, eyes fixed on the silent Ford Pinto in the woods. "Battery still has juice," he told the technician. "Means the engine was shut off manually. She didn't leave the car on her own." As the car was winched from the snow, investigators noted more details. A small brown thread stuck to the driver's door handle, fluttering in the wind, and on the back seat a few short blonde hairs, not matching Sarah's color. Everything visible was photographed, numbered. Hensley always worked meticulously, allowing no one into the vehicle's perimeter except forensics techs. By noon, snow fell heavily again, obliterating all footprints around the scene. Hensley zipped his jacket, scanned the Magnolia woods, no sound but wind through branches. He knew in a few hours, every trace would be gone. He turned to the tech team. "Seal it now. Transport the vehicle to Essex County Forensics. Don't let anyone touch it further." As the car was hauled away, Hensley watched, gripping his small notebook tightly. In his mind, the image of the 18-year-old girl kept appearing amid the white fog, walking into the night and vanishing. Now, the car, the only thing left, lay quietly on the flatbed, carrying all the answers they couldn't yet know. On the drive back, Hensley gazed out the window. The Magnolia woods receding behind, gray leafless trunks fading into snowy shadows. He murmured, almost to himself, "If she's still somewhere around here, these woods know." And Gloucester, in that silent winter afternoon, began to understand that Sarah Whitmore's disappearance was no longer just a family story, but an unanswered question for an entire town. That same afternoon, as the Ford Pinto was brought to the Essex County Forensics Garage, the state forensics team arrived at the scene to continue examination. Snow had stopped, late daylight, casting a silvery gray over the Magnolia woods. Detective Paul Hensley still stood there, cold coffee cup in hand, watching every move of the technicians. He knew this was a fragile moment. If any detail was missed, the whole case could deadlock forever. 2 technicians crouched by the boot prints Hensley had found that morning. In the frozen snow, the impressions were faint but clear enough for tread patterns. One murmured, "Size 10. Work boot, rubber sole, laborer, or mechanic style." The prints headed toward the main road, about 10 meters from the car, then lost in a sloped patch. No return tracks. A few steps away, they found another set. Smaller, likely the victim's, short, hurried steps. The two sets merged, then stopped at the open car door. Another technician lay flat under the car, shining a flashlight. "Oil streak," he said. Hensley knelt beside him, the sharp smell of motor oil rising. A droplet-shaped smear lay right under the right front wheel, thick and dark. The tech swabbed a sample with a cotton tip into a vial. "Not pinto fluid," he said. "Looks like transmission oil from a bigger vehicle, van or light truck." Hensley nodded. The small road through Magnolia was mostly used by workers or locals, rarely strangers. On the door handle, the brown thread Hensley had spotted that morning was still there. Under magnification, it was thin but sturdy, synthetic weave, with tiny red paint flecks. Not wool, not cotton, the tech noted, could be from a work jacket or industrial leather glove. Hensley recalled the mall security guard's witness, blond man, brown jacket. Colors matched, small detail, but not to be overlooked. As light faded, they swept around the car with halogen lamps. The snow reflected golden light, like glass. A patch of snow near the body was unusually deep, with knee print impressions. Hensley bent down, gloved hand lightly touching the dent. Someone might have knelt here, leaning into the car. He straightened, gaze heavy. He didn't act rashly, he said softly. Almost to himself. He knew exactly what he was doing. The tech team continued collecting hairs from the back seat. 3 pale blonde strands, shorter than Sarah's, caught in the headrest crease. No clear struggle signs, but the hair position suggested someone had sat or leaned into the back seat briefly. In the glove compartment, they found a crumpled small paper, a coffee receipt from a roadside diner, time-stamped 9:57 p.m. Hensley immediately recalled another receipt with the signature J. Burns, collected from the mall. Could be coincidence, but to him, coincidences rarely existed in abductions. As the examination wrapped up, snow began flurrying again. Everything was bagged in numbered nylon pouches, every fiber, every oil drop. Hensley glanced back at the scene one last time. The car now just a dark metal hulk, pulled from its spot, leaving deep toe ruts in the snow. He walked the trail out to the road, eyes following the fading footprints in the dusk. On the drive back, he opened the patrol car door, warmed his hands, head replaying the brown jacket, dark thread, and oil drip under the snow. Something linked them. A man driving a van, mechanical trade, knew the Magnolia terrain, struck fast and silent. Hensley didn't voice that assessment to anyone, but in his mind, the portrait of the stranger was beginning to form. At the Essex County Forensics Garage, as the Ford Pinto was wheeled into storage, technicians sealed all evidence into metal boxes, labeled #82 Whitmore Evidence Box. Harsh white neon reflected off the snow-dusted body. Outside, Gloucester was entering Christmas night. None of them knew that the car just hauled in would lie dormant in storage for over 3 decades, and only when technology outpaced time would it begin telling its story. The next morning, wind from the sea whipped across the vast parking lot of Cape Ann Mall, cars still snow-covered, a few janitors clearing after the night storm. Detective Paul Hensley stood arms crossed before the building, long coat dusted thin with frost, eyes scanning the lot, where Sarah Whitmore was last believed to have appeared. After the Ford Pinto was found in Magnolia Woods, this was the only place that might tell what happened between the church and those woods. 2 mall security guards were called to the security office. A middle-aged man named Rick Donahue stated he was on duty until 10:30 that night. Rick remembered clearly because it was his last shift before Christmas. He recounted, "I was patrolling the lot when I saw a green van parked crooked in the far row. I thought it was an employee's, but then saw someone standing by it, man, about 30, blonde hair, brown jacket. He was smoking, looking around like waiting for someone." Rick added that when he circled back 10 minutes later, the van was gone. "Did you see anyone with him?" Hensley asked, eyes fixed on his notebook. Not sure, but I saw a girl crossing that area. Just a silhouette, small knit hat. I don't know if it was the missing girl. The other guard, on closing shift, confirmed the parking lot cameras had been out since early month, awaiting replacement. No footage. Hensley sighed, that familiar letdown in disappearances. A key detail always vanishing at the worst time. He left the security room, gaze sweeping the corner coffee shop. This shop was right by the exit. If Sarah stopped by, someone must have seen her. Inside, the faint smell of scorched coffee and waffles lingered. The owner, Mrs. Maria, recalled a few late customers that night. A man came near closing, she said. Paid cash, signed the receipt with some name. Think it was Burns, J. Burns. Hensley asked to see the sales ledger. Amid dozens of receipts, he found one signed J. Burns. Time stamped 9:57 p.m., the same night Sarah vanished. He folded the paper, pocketed it. The name hadn't appeared in Gloucester records. Do you remember his face? Not clearly, Mrs. Maria replied. Just that he didn't talk much. Black coffee to go, seemed in a hurry. Leaving the mall, Hensley stood in the empty lot. From here, Magnolia Woods were just a dark smudge in the white fog. If that man really drove the green van, he could have taken this straight route, only 15 minutes to where the car was found. The whole stretch empty, no houses, everything fit ominously. That afternoon, Hensley summoned Evan Rourke for re-interview. The boy entered, looking exhausted, face gaunt. He asked directly, "Anyone confirm you were home that night besides your mom?" Evan replied, "Yeah. Neighbor saw me in the garage fixing the car." "I didn't leave the house." Hensley eyed the boy's nails. Thick, dried oil streaks, marks of a garage worker. Quick check revealed Evan's garage held an old Ford with its transmission apart. Oil dripped on the floor, matching the color under the Pinto. Hensley ordered a sample comparison. 2 days later, results confirmed, different types. Evan was cleared as a suspect. With no direct leads, Hensley contacted the FBI Boston office for criminal profiling support. An FBI psychologist specializing in abductions arrived in Gloucester 2 days later. After reviewing the scene and reports, she concluded succinctly, perpetrator likely organized, knows local terrain, has his own vehicle, may have stalked the girl beforehand. He didn't act impulsively, chose the safest moment. Hensley listened, immediately picturing the blond man, brown jacket, and green van from the guard's account. He looked out at the mall parking lot, where the sunset gilded the snow-covered surface. Amid hundreds of faded tire tracks, the traces of that van from that night had likely been erased. But in Hensley's heart, that slender clue, the man named Burns in the green van, began to etch itself deep like a scar. He didn't yet know that the brief name scrawled on the coffee receipt would be the only thread connecting Gloucester to a truth that wouldn't be uncovered for another 34 years. In the weeks after the Ford Pinto was towed from the Magnolia Woods, Sarah Whitmore's disappearance quickly became the talk of Gloucester. The local paper ran a photo of the girl smiling in her choir uniform, bold headline, 18-year-old student vanishes mysteriously. Police hunt man driving green van. But the more people talked, the more everything tangled. The phone at the police station rang day and night. Calls from residents claiming they'd seen Sarah in Salem, in Lynn, even as far as Portland, Maine. Some said they'd spotted her with a blond man on the highway. Others insisted she looked like she was running away. Hensley noted them all, but deep down he knew most were imagination. One witness even insisted she'd seen Sarah with a man in a Navy uniform at the docks. A tip that wasted the investigative team a whole day chasing a non-existent ship. The more leads, the more the investigation diluted. A late-night anonymous call came in, gravelly male voice. "She's buried near the old Halpern Fishing Company warehouse, south of the harbor." First thing the next morning, Hensley sent men with shovels to the site. The abandoned warehouse, rotted wooden walls, inside only the smell of salt and dried fish guts. Nothing but a few feral cats scattering. After that, 3 more similar calls, all wrong. Early February, Snow began to melt, revealing old tire tracks near the Magnolia Woods. A forensics expert claimed they matched 1978 Goodyear tires, a common line for commercial vans. Hensley thought he'd grasped the final thread, but when the list of vehicles using that tire type was tallied, it ran to 30 pages. Hundreds of vehicles in the area could have left the same marks. "We're chasing a shadow in the woods," he said wearily. Through the spring, police expanded the search along the coast. Along Gloucester's rocky shore, dozens of old warehouses and drying sheds once used for fish, now abandoned or half-rented. Hensley and the forensics team went through each one. Every warehouse had its own smell: motor oil, dried fish, rotted wood, sea salt. They shone flashlights into every nook, checked every scrap of fabric, every broken crate. Sometimes, on the damp floor, they'd spot a dark streak that made everyone's heart seize. But it was just oil leaking from an old barrel. Every flicker of hope snuffed out just as quick. No body, no direct witnesses, no sign whether Sarah was alive or dead. The Cape Ann Mall parking lot was cleared clean, the snow carrying away every tangible clue. Hensley returned there many times, standing for hours, staring at the empty pavement, trying to envision the girl's final moments, walking through the fog, the van's headlights, then silence. By April, the press started tapering off. Gloucester returned to its daily rhythm, fishermen heading out, shops opening, missing posters on lampposts, fading under rain. Hensley still couldn't let go. Every morning, he arrived at the station early, reviewing the map, connecting searched spots with red pen. Dense, crisscrossed, like a spider web blanketing Gloucester. He knew time was running out. Search budget cut, task force disbanded. One early June afternoon, after nearly 6 months of fruitless investigation, Hensley sat alone in his office, gazing through the fogged window. On the desk was Sarah's photo, that smile still clear as the night she sang, "Silent Night." He closed his eyes, hearing the waves crashing offshore and the wind whistling through the chimney. Gloucester was entering summer, but inside him, only cold remained. The next day, the file was shelved. The Sarah Whitmore case, classified long-term missing, moved to storage with dozens of others. The evidence, hairs, oil smear, brown thread, neatly placed in a metal box, labeled #82 Whitmore, stored in the corner of the room. Hensley signed the report, pen trembling slightly in his hand. As he stepped out of headquarters, fog from the sea rolled in again, blanketing the harbor. The bells of St. Anne's Church tolled in the distance, the sound evoking the last night anyone heard Sarah's voice. He paused, looking toward the dim lights at the end of the street, where Gloucester's little girl had vanished, and whispered, "If there's anything I missed, I hope someone later will see it." Then he turned away, leaving behind the fog-shrouded street and a case that never truly closed. In the years that followed, Gloucester gradually forgot the name Sarah Whitmore. The coastal town lived on in its old rhythm: ship horns, salt smells, thick fog every morning. Those who'd joined the search team returned to daily work. Some moved away, others no longer recalled the Magnolia Woods clearly. Time blurred the red marks on the map, leaving only a thin file in the police station's archive cabinet. In 1984, the case was officially shifted to the long-term missing case #82 Whitmore category. All evidence, from the brown thread, foreign hairs, to the oil sample and blood drop on the gear shift, neatly boxed in metal, labeled #82 Whitmore evidence box, moved to Essex County Forensic Storage. The cold, sealed room, like a bunker, held hundreds of unfinished cases. Metal boxes stacked on each other, each one an unresolved story. Occasionally, Hensley still visited the storage, opening the box to re-examine each piece of evidence. He always lingered longest on the nylon bag holding the brown thread. It was small enough to overlook, but to him, it was the only sign of the man who dragged Sarah away. "Everything else can lie," he'd once told a young colleague, "but evidence doesn't." Still, for nearly 2 years, no technology existed to identify DNA or trace the thread's origin. Everything was resealed, left to lie dormant in the dark. The 1990s passed quietly. New files piled up. Sarah's case pushed to lower shelves. The press no longer mentioned her name. Missing posters once plastered on lampposts torn by rain and wind, vanishing with the town's old paint. The Whitmore family moved from Gloucester in 1991. The Maplewood Street house sold to a young couple. They didn't know the small attic once held a girl, practicing songs every winter evening. In internal meetings, Whitmore was rarely mentioned. To new officers, it was just an old code. A missing person unidentified, no victim, no perpetrator. Only Hensley, now over 50, kept the habit of driving past Magnolia Woods every Christmas. He'd stop on the dirt road, stand gazing at the frigid trees where the Ford Pinto once lay. Over the years, tire tracks overgrown with moss and grass, only the narrow trail leading to the highway left. "Time can bury everything," he once said to an accompanying officer. But somewhere in the soil, her traces remain. By late 1999, when Essex Forensics conducted an evidence inventory, they reopened box #82 Whitmore to check storage condition. In the log, a brief note, typo bloodstain unidentified, sample intact, well preserved. No one imagined that dry line would become a bridge to the next generation. At the time, Hensley still believed the case could reopen. He submitted an internal petition to retest the blood sample with new early 2000s tech, but budget cuts shelved it. "We can't test every old case," superiors said. Whitmore's no longer priority. In 2002, Hensley retired after 30 years of service. On his last day at the station, he carried a photocopy of Sarah's photo, folded small in his wallet. "I can't say I finished the job," he told his subordinates, "because part of Gloucester is still missing." As he left headquarters, the file room door closed behind him, leaving the silent evidence boxes in the dark. 2 years later, in 2004, Gloucester entered a new era. The city expanded the harbor. Population grew. Old memories buried under fresh concrete. But in the basement of Essex County Forensics, Sarah Whitmore's evidence box still sat quietly on the shelf, paper label starting to yellow. No one remembered it anymore, except a faint handwritten note in the label's corner. "Keep possible evidence." One late afternoon, as the archivist turned off the storage lights, the last ray hit those words before the steel door shut. Inside, amid hundreds of unfinished stories, the Sarah Whitmore case slumbered in silence for another 10 years, until someone else, from another generation, opened it again. In 2004, after 2 decades of quiet, the name Sarah Whitmore reappeared on a Gloucester police desk. When Massachusetts launched the Cold Case Review Program, aiming to scan old cases with biological evidence, Hensley had been retired 2 years. He lived quietly in a small house on the outskirts of Rockport, rarely visiting the station, but the young officers still knew the story of the 1982 disappearance, the no victim, no perpetrator case that haunted his career. In the list of hundreds of files reviewed, #82 Whitmore sat near the end. A young forensics tech opened the old metal box, outer label, yellowed. Inside, everything intact, nylon bags holding hairs, brown thread, oil smear, and glass vial with dried blood from the Ford Pinto gear shift. An old paper clipped in the file still bore Hensley's handwriting, Group O, unknown origin. That line flagged the file eligible for DNA testing. The lead on the case was Detective Alan Price, 45, freshly transferred from Boston to Gloucester. Price had worked violent crimes, experienced with the new short tandem repeat, STR DNA tech, allowing extraction and identification of genetic markers from tiny samples, impossible in the 1980s. Opening the evidence box, he noted everything preserved with astonishing care. "Someone back then believed this day would come," he murmured to his assistant. Price began rereading the entire old file. He saw Hensley's name on every page, scene diagrams, witness lists, even marginal notes. One simple handwritten line: "If tech allows, test gear shift blood first." He smiled. It was as if his predecessor had left instructions for him. Across more than 2 decades. On March 12, 2004, The blood sample shipped to the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab in Cambridge. Techs used a cotton swab to lift the dried sample, dissolving it in enzyme solution. Under the microscope, DNA structure emerged, faint but clear enough for analysis. Price was there for the first run. Numeric strings lit the screen, characteristic repeats unique to human DNA. A tech turned to him, softly. Male DNA, not the victim's. That news left Price still for a long moment. 22 years gone, and now they had what Hensley always sought, a trace of the man who'd been with Sarah in the cab. The only issue, who was he? The DNA profile ran immediate comparison against Tagoda's combined DNA index system, the national database Massachusetts had just linked to. But results came back empty. No match found. No one in state or federal criminal records matched the genetic signature. Price didn't falter. He knew the system too new. Data incomplete for past offenders. He backed up the full 82 Whitmore DNA profile to a separate drive and sent it with a report to Boston headquarters. In his notes he wrote, "Male DNA sample well preserved, eligible for long-term storage. Identity unidentified, but high potential for future identification." That evening, leaving the lab, Price drove across the Blinman Bridge to the sea. Gloucester's sky pitch black, only yellow lights reflecting on the cold water. He'd never met Sarah Whitmore, but gazing at the old file photo, the young girl with gentle smile and soft brown hair, he felt clearly something lingering in this town, a story refusing to sleep. Weeks later, he visited Hensley in Rockport. The ex-detective opened the door, silver hair, eyes still sharp. Hearing about the DNA, he was silent a long time, then said only, "I've waited for this news over 20 years." They sat by the window overlooking the sea, wind carrying salt and cold rain inside. Hensley asked, "Can we find him?" Price replied, "Not yet. But now we know he exists." Before leaving, Price handed him a printout of the test results, the endless DNA string. "This doesn't lie," he said. "Sooner or later, it'll give us answers." As the door closed, Hensley sat still, hand on the old Sarah photo on the table. At the frame's corner, afternoon light hit the glass, flashing like a small blood streak. Outside, waves pounded the rocks, steady and relentless, like a reminder that what seems lost is sometimes just waiting to be found. And in the Essex County Evidence Storage, box #82 Whitmore relabeled with a new sticker, "DNA extracted, preserved indefinitely." After over 20 years dormant, the Sarah Whitmore case finally opened its eyes for the first time. When the test confirmed male DNA, Detective Alan Price knew he stood before what Gloucester had awaited over 20 years, a real trace, small but clear, potentially leading to the man who'd vanished with Sarah Whitmore into the 1982 winter night. But that excitement soon gave way to emptiness when the lab report arrived. No match in Massachusetts CODIS database. The CODIS system, the National Genetic Database operational, only a few years then, remained limited. It mainly held DNA from recently convicted felons, old cases, or uncaught persons, uncollected. Sarah's sample, though complete, now just an outlier, a genetic signature floating in space, awaiting a day someone matched it. Price sat before his computer screen in his small Gloucester office, fluorescent light illuminating endless numeric rows. The 82 Whitmore DNA string clear, a perfect identifier, like a fingerprint of a nameless soul. Below the results, he hand-noted, "Full male DNA profile, preserve for future comparison." He read that line many times, feeling equal hope and helplessness. They had evidence, a real man who'd been in Sarah's car, but no name, no face, no past. A scientific ghost, existing amid numbers. In the days after, Price patiently reviewed the entire old file. He re-examined the 1982 security guard sketch, the description blonde man brown jacket, driving green van. The name J. Burns on the coffee receipt drew special attention. He sent a statewide Massachusetts search request, but era data still manual. No matches in Gloucester radius. The mystery man remained just a scrawled note on yellowed paper. Afternoon, Price brought the file to the chief investigator's office. On the desk, he laid the report and DNA photocopy. "We have a complete male sample," he said, "but no current CODIS match. I recommend keeping all evidence intact, indefinitely, if possible." The chief skimmed the file, nodded slightly. "You think this case still has a shot, Price?" "Yes," Price replied. No hesitation. "Tech's changing. We're just starting to see what it can do." His confidence wasn't blind faith. In investigations, early 2000s marked DNA's rise as criminology's new language. Dozens of cold cases reignited across America from a single surviving cell. Price knew if they kept this sample long enough, one day it would speak. That June, he and two techs visited Essex County Forensics to personally recheck evidence. The old metal box pulled from the shelf, thick dust layer. Lid open, inside still the vial, with blood sample, labeled in Hensley's hand. Lab light reflected off the glass, flashing like a dark red streak. Price stared long, feeling like peering through a time crack. Everything frozen since 1982 winter, only people had changed. He had the box relabeled with a new sticker. Bold print, preserve indefinitely. DNA profile established. The box returned to the steel shelf, beside hundreds of other cases. As the steel door shut, the lock clicked dry, but to Price, not an end, but a marker for a new journey's start. Evening, he drove back to Gloucester. On Blenman Bridge, thick fog, blanketed, lights reflecting on rippling water. He turned on the radio, news about DNA tech helping California police find a killer after 30 years. Price shut it off, hands gripping the wheel tight, murmuring, "Massachusetts' turn now." Home, he opened the file again. On the table, Sarah Whitmore's photo lay beside the DNA printout. Two different worlds, a smiling face and soulless numbers, but both awaiting connection. He placed them side by side, reminder that this work wasn't just science, it was a promise between two detective generations. Hensley started it, and he'd carry on. Before lights out, Price added a final line to his notebook, words almost a vow. "No death vanishes completely, just needs time and patience to hear what evidence wants to say." Elsewhere, in the cold Essex County storage room, box #82 Whitmore lay quiet under dim yellow light. On the new label, "Preserve indefinitely," like a prophecy. No one imagined that over 10 years later, that DNA sample, seemingly meaningless in 2004, would lead all of Gloucester to the answer Hensley sought his whole life. In 2012, Gloucester was far removed from the small coastal town it once was. Seafood shacks along the harbor glowed year-round, tourists flocked in summer, and the name Sarah Whitmore now only surfaced in dusty archived files. The Gloucester PD's Criminal Investigations Unit had just been revamped, younger, more dynamic. Among the new faces was one with a familiar surname, Detective Ryan Price, the only son of Alan Price. Ryan was 33 then, a graduate of the Massachusetts State Police Academy, who'd worked forensics in Boston before returning to his father's hometown. He'd grown up with Gloucester's waves, with the case stories his dad still told over dinner, cases without endings. But the name Sarah Whitmore, mentioned only a few times, always lingered in his memory. That one haunted the old man. Ryan once joked to a colleague, he believed one day that girl would be found. That February, while sorting his father's old office on the second floor of headquarters, Ryan found a silver USB drive in a drawer. On the faded label, handwritten script, "Whitmore, DNA." 2004, he plugged it into his computer, opened the single folder inside. A document file appeared, containing the DNA sequence, Alan's notes, and the final line, "Preserve indefinitely, potential for future analysis." Ryan leaned back in his chair, silent for a long time. It felt like hearing his father's voice echoing from 10 years ago. That DNA sample will speak if someone just listens. He decided he would be that someone. In the months that followed, Ryan began studying new forensic technologies. He read FBI reports on DNA phenotyping, the method analyzing genes to reconstruct the donor's physical traits, hair color, eye color, skin tone, even facial structure. It was something impossible in 2004, and one name appeared repeatedly in the trade articles, Hudson Forensics, a private lab in Virginia, renowned for creating genetic portraits. Ryan contacted them directly. After weeks of correspondence and paperwork, the male DNA sample from case hash 82 Whitmore was securely shipped to Virginia. He included a handwritten letter containing only, "This is a 1982 disappearance from Gloucester. The DNA sample is confirmed complete. We want to know, what did this man's face look like?" The wait stretched for months. In the meantime, Ryan pored over his father's entire file. He read every page of notes, every crime scene photo, every sketch of the brown-jacketed man in the parking lot. Amid the yellowed papers was a small four-folded note inside his father's handwriting. J. Burns, Cape Ann Mall, 9:57 p.m. That name had never led anywhere. Ryan photographed it, saved it to his phone. One afternoon, he took his coffee out to the harbor front, where fog still blanketed thick whenever the ocean wind rose, and wondered if that man was still alive or lost among the anonymous crowds. By October, the results from Hudson Forensics arrived by mail, in a thick, carefully sealed envelope. Ryan opened it in his office, only the ceiling fan whirring steadily overhead. Inside was a color printout, a portrait of a man about 25-30 years old, light blonde hair, gray-blue eyes, high cheekbones, a cold and sharp expression. Below was the caption, "Genetic phenotyping result, European male, blonde hair, blue eyes, light skin tone. Approximate age in 1982, 27 Pradi Res." Ryan stared at the paper. For the first time in 30 years, Gloucester had the face of the man who'd once sat in Sarah Whitmore's car. A face not from witness description, but drawn by genetics itself. He pinned the printout to the investigation board, right next to Sarah's photo. Two faces gazing at each other across 30 years. A 18-year-old girl and a nameless mystery man. In that moment, Ryan knew his father's case had entered a new chapter. That evening, he called his mother. She noticed his voice trembling slightly over the line. "You're looking at that case again?" "I can't stop, Mom. It's like Dad back then." On the other end, his mother was silent a moment, then said, "If your father were alive, he'd be proud." Ryan set the phone down, turned back to Sarah's photo once more. Outside the window, snow began falling, blanketing the harbor white. The yellow light reflected on the photo made the girl's eyes seem to glow amid the winter. He whispered in his mind, "We're still looking for you, Sarah, and this time, we won't stop." In another cabinet in the investigations room, the metal box hash 82 Whitmore was brought back to light. A new sticker affixed, "DNA phenotype generated, Hudson Forensics, 2012. The storage door closed, leaving a low echo in the hallway. But in Gloucester, the smoldering fire of the old case had been reignited once more. This time, by the hands of a new generation. The image from Hudson Forensics wasn't just a sheet of paper, it was the first real face of the man Gloucester had hunted for over 30 years. Ryan Price pinned the printout to the wooden board in the investigations room, right amid the old crime scene photos. The man in the image had light blonde hair, cold gray-blue eyes, a jawline sharp as if chiseled from steel. That gaze wasn't exactly angry, but strangely calm, as if he were observing someone through frosted glass. Ryan stood still before the photo for a long time, feeling half chilled, half compelled. He began combing through Gloucester residency records from 1980, 1983, focusing on men aged 25, 35, with light hair, blue eyes, in mechanical or technical trades. Based on the motor oil sample found under the Ford Pinto, the initial list had over 40 names. He sat in his office many nights straight, checking each file, noting every small detail: who owned a van, who lived near Magnolia, who left town after December 1982. Many names crossed out, either deceased or proven unrelated. None matched prior suspects. Evan Rourke, Sarah's old boyfriend, now lived in another state, cleared from the start. Those questioned in Hensley's time, the mall guard, coffee shop staff, mostly retired, their memories faded like Gloucester sea fog. One afternoon, Ryan sat with his father's old investigator, Joe Callahan, who'd worked Gloucester since the 80s. He poured coffee, eyed the portrait sketch, and whistled softly. I've seen eyes like that, can't remember where, but definitely around the ferry dock. You said the ferry dock? Yeah. Back then I pulled shifts at Cape Ann Ferry Terminal. Some stranger showed up there a few times, end of '82, weekends. He wasn't local, funny accent, Midwest type. Ryan sat up, opened his notebook. Do you remember if he was with anyone? No, always alone. He'd lean on the railing, smoke, stare out at sea. I even joked he looked like someone waiting for somebody. That account sent a chill down Ryan's spine. In his mind, old fragments clicked instantly. The blonde man, brown jacket, green van, the 1982 mall guard's description, now matching the image in his hands almost perfectly. If he'd appeared at the ferry dock, it meant he knew the terrain, the routes to Magnolia. He might have chosen that spot for its quiet and quick escape after the crime. He decided to head to Cape Ann Ferry the next morning. The place had changed a lot. New waiting area, paved parking lot. Only a few rusted iron lampposts from the 80s still standing. Ryan walked the pier, pausing at the railing overlooking the sea, where that man once stood. The March sky overcast, wind whipping sea fog into his face. He closed his eyes, trying to envision that night, a young girl crossing the parking lot through fog, van headlights flashing on, a blonde man waiting. It all happened in minutes, no screams, no witnesses. On the way back, he stopped at a small eatery near the port, where sailors often paused. An older waitress, Martha, slowed when Ryan mentioned the disappearance. I remember a stranger who sat here, she said. He ordered black coffee, never talked much. His voice sounded off, not Northeast at all. I once asked where he was from. He just smiled and said, "From a place no one remembers." Ryan left the diner, that phrase echoing in his head, from a place no one remembers. He returned to the station, cross-referencing all residency data with old state vehicle registrations. Results showed over 100 green vans registered in Essex County in 1982. He filtered by temporary addresses, narrowing to those from the Midwest: Iowa, Wisconsin, Illinois. The list now down to 3 names. On screen, Ryan paused at one: Jerry Burns, born 1955, Iowa native, former mechanic technician, brief stint living in Worcester, Massachusetts, early 80s. He printed the file, placed it beside the genetic portrait. Eyes, hair, age, all matched near perfectly. But Ryan told no one yet. He remembered his father's warning: don't rush into coincidences, wait for evidence that speaks. He needed more data, something linking the man in the photo to Gloucester 1982. That night, he brought the file home. In his small Seaview apartment, Ryan sat before Sarah Whitmore's photo, hung on the wall, desk lamp, illuminating her eyes in the image. 30 years passed. Everything seemed sunk into the past. But now, in the quiet, he felt like she was looking straight at him. Outside, Atlantic wind howled, rattling the window frames slightly. Ryan closed the file, whispered, "If he's really the one, we'll find him, Sarah." And somewhere, in an archive hundreds of miles from Gloucester, the name Jerry Burns still lay dormant in Massachusetts' old residency rolls, waiting for someone to call it from the shadows. In 2015, as DNA forensics entered a whole new era, Detective Ryan Price decided to try what his father once joked was straight out of sci-fi movies: genetic genealogy tracing. For 3 years since Hudson Forensics sent back the suspect's biological portrait, the Sarah Whitmore case had fallen silent again. The sketch of the blonde, blue-eyed man still hung on the investigation's room wall, facing the victim's photo. Every morning entering the room, Ryan felt that blank gaze following him. He knew to advance the case further, only DNA could bridge over 30 years. He signed up for GED Match, the open database allowing DNA comparisons not just to criminal records, but to voluntary public submissions for family tree tracing. The male DNA from the Whitmore case was fully resequenced with new tech, then uploaded to the system. Days waiting for results dragged slow. Ryan told no one, not wanting to build hope, only to dash it again. By the morning of July 4th, 2015. Opening his computer at the office, the screen showed, one partial match found, probability, second cousin once removed. Ryan held his breath. Below in the info box, Brandy Burns. Vancouver, Washington, Burns, he whispered. That name had appeared on the coffee receipt his father kept from 1982. An uncommon surname, and now surfacing from a completely separate DNA database. Ryan contacted a Boston geneticist immediately for verification. After cross-checking, they confirmed the genealogy showed the suspect's DNA shared distant ancestry with the Burns line Iowa roots. From there, the family tree redrew, a Burns branch migrating from Iowa to Massachusetts late 70s. Among them, Jerry Lynn Burns, born 1955, once lived in Worcester, about 100 kilometers from Gloucester. Occupation, mechanic technician for an industrial equipment manufacturer. Ryan dug up Jerry Burns' old tax returns from state labor records. One detail nearly stopped his breath. Burns had a short contract at a Cape Ann machinery maintenance shop in November and December 1982. The exact time Sarah vanished, contract lasted 6 weeks, ended without clear reason. He stared at the file, feeling the whole picture assembling. Blonde man, Midwest accent, brown jacket, green van, the name Burns, all the pieces his father and Hensley chased now forming a clear shape. That night, Ryan sat alone in the office, yellow light spilling over the thick stack of documents. He underlined Jerry Burns' name in red pen. Outside the window, summer rain pattered steadily on the roof, rhythmic as a pounding heartbeat. He thought of his father, the years he'd devoted to this case, and felt like he'd touched what he once believed real. But Ryan knew the discovery was just the start. Genetic genealogy wasn't legal proof. It only gave direction. He needed something concrete, a direct DNA sample from Jerry Burns himself for comparison. He emailed the state forensics expert, absolute confidentiality. I'll verify my own way. Before leaving the office, he removed the biological portrait from the wall, placed it beside the newly printed file on Jerry Burns. 2 faces, one gene-built, one from an old ID photo, matched down to the details, hair color, eyes, age. Ryan murmured, almost whispering to the man in the photo, 33 years, where have you been all that time? Outside Gloucester entered fall, the sea swelled with big waves, wind rattling the glass panes. Inside, only the desk lamp illuminated 2 photos, a missing girl, and the man she never got to name. The answer was emerging, hidden in his own bloodline, and Ryan knew, just one more step. If they got Jerry Burns' real DNA, Gloucester wouldn't wait another winter. Early fall 2015, Gloucester turned colder than usual. Sea wind brought thick fog to office windows, and in the small investigations room on the 2nd floor, Detective Ryan Price hadn't turned off the lights for many nights straight. Since the genetic genealogy results named Jerry Lynn Burns, he barely slept. All the data, DNA, physical description, occupation, time and place, matched ominously. But Ryan knew only one thing could end 33 years of waiting: a live DNA sample from Burns, taken directly from him. To avoid rocking the case, Ryan kept it secret, sharing only with a small Worcester County police team, where Burns lived. They opened a confidential file, naming the Operation Magnolia Revisit. Burns was 60 then, owner of a small machinery maintenance firm in Worcester suburbs. Neighbors described him as a calm man, punctual, quiet, never any trouble. Wife deceased years ago, 3 grown children visiting occasionally. No one suspected the man with silvered blonde hair, cold eyes, and gentle smile. Over 2 months, Ryan and 2 Worcester officers shadowed Burns silently. They took turns tailing his silver-gray van to the office each morning. Parking at the same roadside coffee shop, all his routines normal, too normal, making Ryan increasingly uneasy. Day 17, they installed a disguised camera at Burns' usual coffee spot. He always ordered black coffee, no sugar. To go, sat in his car, reading the paper for 10 minutes before driving off. Each time leaving, he tossed the plastic straw into the trash bin near the exit. Ryan stood not far, in an unmarked car, watching through binoculars. He knew the moment he left, was their only window. As Burns drove away, Ryan stepped out, gloved, lifted the bin lid. Amid crumpled cups and napkins, he spotted a straw with dried coffee lipstick. He lifted it with plastic tongs into an evidence bag, hands trembling slightly. All in under 10 seconds. He closed the lid, turned away as if nothing happened. That evening, the sample shipped straight to Hudson Forensics, the lab that built the suspect portrait. Ryan didn't specify origin, just requested comparison to the 1982 #82 Whitmore DNA on file. The experts agreed, promising priority testing within a week. 7 days later, phone ringing, Ryan was home, sunset light slanting through the window. He heard the familiar voice from Hudson Forensics, low but firm. "Ryan, we've completed the comparison. The results, full match, 100%. He stood frozen seconds, heart pounding. That statement encapsulated 33 years of investigation, 3 generations of police, thousands of hours. "You're sure?" "No doubt. DNA from the straw matches the blood on the victim's Ford Pinto gearshift. No discrepancies at any locus." Ryan sank into a chair, eyes fixed out the window. Far off, the sea dyed red in sunset, peaceful to cruelty. He pictured Magnolia Woods again, the abandoned car, the first blood drop found, where his father once believed truth still lay in the soil. 3 hours later, Ryan drove to Worcester. He clutched the lab report, stamped official. Beside him, Lieutenant Graham from Worcester PD, who'd partnered the surveillance. In the car, silence. As they neared the quiet suburb, yellow lights gleamed on bare trees. Burns had just locked the shop, stepping into the lot. He wore a dark brown jacket, scarf, slow gait. For a moment, Ryan felt time slip back to 1982. The image of the brown-jacketed man by the green van, at Cape Ann Mall, vivid as ever. He stopped the car a few meters away, watching. "Don't do anything rash," Lieutenant Graham said. "We need a warrant." Ryan nodded, eyes fixed on Burns. The man opened his car door, turning on the cabin light, the yellow glow illuminating an aged but chillingly familiar face. Silver-white hair, gray-blue eyes still deep and cold, as in the genetic portrait. That same evening, Ryan returned to Gloucester PD headquarters. He placed the thick stack of documents before the Essex County prosecutor, voice low but firm. "I need an arrest warrant for Jerry Lynn Burns, residing in Worcester, on charges of kidnapping and murdering Sarah Whitmore in 1982. The prosecutor flipped quickly through the report. The bold conclusion line, DNA profile #82 Whitmore, 1982, match at 21 STR loci, with sample obtained from suspect Jerry Lynn Burns, 2015. Probability of random match, 1 in 100 billion. He looked up at Ryan, silent for a moment, then said, 33 years, and you kept everything intact. Ryan replied softly, eyes on Sarah's photo on the wall. Not me. She did. 2 days later, the arrest warrant was officially signed. Ryan returned to Worcester with a task force. By then, winter winds had returned, flurries dusting the roads. As the police car pulled out of the lot, Ryan glanced in the rearview mirror, where snowflakes blended into the yellow lights like reenacting the night Sarah vanished. This time, after 33 years, Gloucester would no longer let a shadow dissolve into the white fog. On the morning of December 10, 2015, Worcester's sky hung heavy with leaden gray. Snow flurried since dawn, blurring the streets around the industrial area where Jerry Burns worked. His headquarters sat in an old brick building, small silver-painted sign, inside an industrial machine repair shop and a few narrow offices. From outside, nothing unusual, just a quiet family business amid Massachusetts winter. Ryan Price parked a block away. He wore plain clothes, black jacket, badge tucked in his pocket. In the car, he checked his watch, 8:47 a.m. With him was a Worcester officer and a recording technician. No cuffs, no Miranda rights. Ryan instructed quietly, "We're just talking. He doesn't know what we have." They entered the shop, where motor oil mingled with metal smells. An older woman at the reception desk looked up. Ryan flashed his badge, voice mild, "Gloucester Police. I'd like to speak with Mr. Burns for a few minutes." She nodded, pointing to the back office door with a brass plaque. J. L. Burns, owner. The door opened after 3 soft knocks. Jerry Burns stood there, tall and lean, silver blonde hair, strangely gray-blue eyes. He wore a light blue shirt, sleeves rolled to elbows, hands lightly oiled. "What is it?" His voice low and calm. "We're reviewing an old case," Ryan said, stepping inside. "One in Gloucester, 1982. Burns furrowed his brow slightly, leaned against the desk, eyed them for a long moment. No expression, just thick silence amid the wall clock's tick. Finally he shrugged, voice soft. "Gloucester? I don't remember. How many years ago was that?" Ryan sat in the opposite chair, placed his small notebook on the desk. Neon light spilled over the surface, reflecting in Burns' cold eyes. 33 years, Ryan replied. "And I think you were there. End of 1982, you had a short job in Cape Ann. Remember?" Burns pursed his lips, gaze flickering briefly. He leaned down, tapped fingers lightly on the desk. "Maybe," he said. "I worked lots of places. Long time ago, my memory's not what it used to be." Ryan opened his briefcase, pulled out an old photo. The crime scene of the snow-covered Ford Pinto, interior light still faintly on. He placed the photo on the desk, slid it toward him. "Do you recognize this?" Burns leaned down, eyed the photo for seconds, then shook his head. "No, never seen that car." Ryan watched every tiny reaction. When the second photo was placed down, the biological portrait from Hudson Forensics, young man's face with blonde hair, blue eyes. Burns looked up, straight at Ryan. Between them, that brief space, heavy enough to hear snow tapping the window glass. "Do you know who this is?" Ryan asked, voice even. Burns leaned back in his chair, slowly sipped cold coffee from the mug. "No," he said. "What are you trying to say?" Ryan met his eyes directly. "Your DNA was in her car." A long silence enveloped the room. The only sound was the clock hand ticking. Burns said nothing, eyes down on the desk, fingers tapping unconsciously. Ryan stayed silent, not pressing, letting truth seep into the void between them. Finally, Burns sighed, long and heavy. He propped elbows on the desk, stared into the empty space ahead. His voice rasped, almost a whisper. "If I tell you where she is, will anything change?" Ryan didn't blink. Everything in him froze. That statement wasn't from an innocent man. He felt the room's air solidify, like glass about to shatter. Burns still didn't look up. He twisted the coffee mug in his hands, thin steam rising, then vanishing quick in the air. "I didn't know her name," he said softly. "Just remember it was very cold, and I didn't mean to do it." Ryan forced calm. He nodded slightly, voice low, almost just for him to hear. "Keep going." Burns gave a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I've lived half my life waiting for this day," he said. "You finally came." Then he looked up, gaze flickering with something like relief. "But I need to know, if I tell, will she be left in peace?" Ryan replied. "All we want is to bring her home." Silence again. Outside, snow fell thicker, wind whistling through door cracks. Burns closed his eyes, head back against the chair. Moments later, he spoke, voice low, gravelly. "There's a place, near the Ipswich River. I drove through there once. An abandoned wooden house behind a small woods. If you go, there might still be something." Ryan stood slowly, eyes fixed on the wrinkled face before him. He didn't know if truth or diversion. But that phrase, "if I tell you where she is," had changed the air around him forever. As they left the office, snow blanketed the steps. Ryan pulled up his jacket collar, breathed deep, the biting cold air. In his head, that man's weary voice echoed, steady, no tremor, no fear. Part of him knew this was the first time in 33 years the perpetrator had admitted, albeit with a question. That afternoon, a search warrant for the woods along the Ipswich River was issued. Gloucester prepared for its final trip in its longest journey. That night, snow fell heavily, blanketing the hills on Worcester's edge. Inside the small county police interrogation room, white light spilled on Jerry Burns' ashen face. The wall clock passed midnight, marking over 6 hours of continuous questioning. Ryan Price sat opposite, voice steady, no pressure, no threats, just repeating the same question. "How did you leave Gloucester that night?" Burns silent for a long time. His breath fogged thin in the cold room. Eyes not on Ryan, but the empty space ahead. "I left the body where," he said slowly. "No one could find it." The words dropped into the heavy space like a stone. Ryan sat up straight, heart racing but face unchanged. "Where, Jerry?" Burns pursed his lips, bony hands clenching on the table. "Near the Ipswich River," he whispered. "Behind the hills. A dirt road. I went there while working in Cape Ann. No one goes in winter." Ryan glanced at the prosecutor in the room's corner. They exchanged looks. He spoke softly, almost a whisper. "We need you to show the way." Burns lifted his head, eyes blinking slow. In that brief moment, exhaustion showed clear. "I'll take you there," he said. "But I don't want anyone else coming." 3 a.m., the police convoy left Worcester, heading north. Snow thick, wind howling through roadside woods. Burns in the back seat, hands cuffed, eyes straight ahead, not a word. Ryan beside him, chest heavy between anger and something like pity. Blue-red lights flashing on snow-draped trees. When the car turned onto the dirt road by the Ipswich River, Burns signaled to stop. He pointed to the dark woods. In there, an old wooden house, roof caved. "I left her near it." Police turned on floodlights, illuminating the hillside. They stepped out, flashlights sweeping bare trunks. Underfoot, snow deep to ankles. A damp, cold, ancient mold smell rose from the ground. Ryan led, following Burns' pointed direction. Minutes later, flashlight beams halted on flat ground, where rotted wooden beams emerged. Ruins of an abandoned wooden house, just as he said. "Here," Burns murmured, voice nearly lost in the wind, behind, under the big tree canopy. Ryan signaled the forensics team. They advanced, shovels and hands digging frozen hard soil. Soon, shovel tip hit something. A faint metal scrape on bone echoed. Everyone froze. Flashlight beam on the pit. A pale bone fragment emerged from black earth, followed by a rotted cloth scrap, small glittering beads catching the light. No one spoke, only wind and camera clicks recording each detail. As they carefully lifted, the cloth turned out to be remnants of a sweater. The gray sweater Sarah wore the night she vanished. Beside it, mixed in the dirt, a silver bracelet engraved SRO, her initials. Ryan knelt, gloved hand lightly touching the bracelet. A cold gust made him shiver, but he didn't pull back. "Secure the area," he said softly. His voice trembled but clear. "This is her." The forensics team worked through dawn. They exhumed bone fragments, documented fabric scraps, all bagged, numbered, shipped to Essex County morgue. As sunrise broke, fog lifting, the woods emerged in silvery gray light. A scene both serene and haunting. Burns was led back to the car, silent. On the return drive, Ryan watched him in the rear view. He didn't avoid, just stared out the window, eyes vacant. "Why Jerry?" Ryan asked, voice hoarse. "Why her?" Burns shook his head faintly. "I don't know," he replied, weary. "I just remember she looked at me, then screamed. After that, everything blurred. When I realized, it was too late." Ryan didn't answer. In that moment, he realized no explanation could make it understandable. One life, one town, 33 years waiting, all for a senseless, cruel instant. Days later, the Massachusetts State Medical Examiner announced results. DNA from bones and hair matched Sarah Whitmore's archived 1982 hair sample perfectly. The report to Gloucester PD, just 3 lines. Remains positively identified as Sarah Whitmore. Cause of death, multiple stab wounds consistent with 1982 case. Case reclassified. Homicide. Solved. That afternoon, Ryan entered the office, where Sarah's photo still hung on the wall. Sunset slanted through the window, casting light on her face in the image. He stood still, a gentle wave washing his chest. sorrow, and release. News spread fast. A press conference held at Gloucester PD headquarters. Ryan, in dark uniform, before dozens of reporters, voice low but resolute. After more than 33 years, we can confirm Sarah Whitmore has been found. The room fell dead silent. In that moment, Gloucester seemed to exhale after 3 decades held breath. Outside the window, light snow dusted the harbor, blanketing anchored boats white. And somewhere, in the cold soil by the Ipswich River, the young girl's soul finally came home. In the days after Sarah Whitmore's remains were found, Gloucester was no longer as peaceful as before. The Massachusetts State Medical Examiner's office became the center of attention. In the sealed, brightly lit cold room, evidence dormant over 3 decades, finally laid on the examination table. Everything from bone fragments, cloth scraps, silver bracelet, to old samples from the Ford Pinto, re-examined. When the first forensics report reached the prosecutor's office, the opening line made Ryan Price read it repeatedly. DNA profile of suspect Jerry Lynn Burns matches victim case hash, 82 Whitmore, at 21 genetic loci. Probability of random match, 1 in 100 billion. 21 loci, 21 perfect gene matches, no deviation, no mistake, irrefutable. Burns' DNA appeared at every key point: blood drop on gear shift, blood on driver's seat, now cellular traces in cloth near the body. Forensics experts affirmed preserving evidence for 34 years in standard conditions was rare. The blood vial still bore Detective Paul Hensley's 1982 handwritten label, Ryan's father, whose script he'd seen in old files. Essex County storage maintained steady 4 degrees Celsius, no freezing, no direct light, a near-perfect protocol before DNA's importance was fully grasped. When separating the ancient blood sample and comparing to the 2015 coffee straw sample from Burns, Hudson forensics analysts cross-checked via 3 methods: STR, mitochondrial DNA, and YSTR. Results unanimous. This isn't just a match, Hudson's lead expert said, over phone to Ryan. This is confirmation. But DNA wasn't the only evidence. From documents seized in Burns' home search, police found an old Red Wing shoe store receipt from Iowa, dated September 1982. Work boots, rubber tread triangular, size 10. Product code matched exactly the boot prints left by the Ford Pinto in Magnolia Woods. In sales records, Burns paid by personal check, direct link to the scene trace. In the trace lab, a specialist carefully placed enlarged boot print photo beside the actual boot model. Under light, 2 tread grooves aligned parallel, a small heel scratch, rare feature, matching the 1982 scene photo tier. No further analysis needed, she said. Identical to the millimeter. Additionally, the oil smear under Sarah's car reanalyzed via modern mass spectrometry. Results showed origin from 1978 GM van transmission fluid. The model Burns once registered in Worcester. Questioned about the vehicle, he only said sold long ago, but DMV records confirm no title transfer. The van vanished from system same time as Sarah's murder. Each small detail locked into place like completing puzzle pieces. Blood drop, boot prints, motor oil, work location, vague confession. Every path led to one man, Jerry Lynn Burns. On the afternoon of January 5, 2016, at Essex County Prosecutor's Office, forensics experts presented the full analysis chain before investigators and district attorney. On the large screen, gene diagram, parallel DNA strands, code segments overlapping perfectly between samples. Specimen 1982. Specimen 2015. The meeting room dead silent. A scientist said, if these 2 samples aren't the same person, the odds of another perfect match are lower than lightning striking twice in the same spot. Ryan sat at table's end, hands clenched, his father's voice echoing in his head. That DNA sample will speak if someone just listens. Now, after 34 years it had. The prosecutor stood, ending the meeting with a short statement, "We have enough." That day the formal indictment completed. Contents: Jerry Lynn Burns indicted on first-degree murder in the Sarah Whitmore case, based on biological and physical evidence matching absolutely. News spread fast. Local papers headlined, 1982, cold case, DNA breakthrough identifies suspect. Gloucester, after over 3 decades, again Massachusetts focal point. Residents who witnessed the 1982 disappearance carried indescribable emotions, shock, and relief. Ryan returned to the old Essex County evidence storage, where the metal box #82 Whitmore still sat in the corner of the shelf. He opened the lid, gazed at the glass vial containing the dried blood drop, Hensley's handwritten label still clearly legible. He placed his hand on the box's edge, murmured, "We heard it just like you said." Outside, Gloucester's sunset descended, the sea reflecting a deep red glow, like an old bloodstain dissolving in water. The investigation had reached the end of its journey, and now all evidence from scientific to physical converged on a single conclusion. Forensic science, once a distant dream in 1982, now served as the final witness. It not only proved one man's guilt, but restored the voice to a girl who had been silent for more than half a lifetime. In the final summary report, the medical examiner's director wrote a short sentence, but perhaps the most accurate epilogue for the entire case. Time did not destroy the truth, it preserved it. The trial of Jerry Lynn Burns began on a cold February morning in 2016 at Worcester Superior Court. Outside, snow blanketed the stone steps thickly. Gloucester residents, reporters, and even those who had known Sarah Whitmore back then crowded the hallways. 34 years of waiting turned this trial into a symbol of delayed justice. In the courtroom, white lights shone on the old wooden benches. Burns was brought in, silver hair, face strangely serene. He wore a gray suit, walked slowly, eyes on no one. As he sat in the defendant's chair, his gaze briefly paused on Sarah Whitmore's photo on the large screen before looking away immediately. Prosecutor Nicholas Maybanks stood to open, voice resounding in the dead silent air. "Ladies and gentlemen, for 34 years, Gloucester has lived with the haunting of young girl Sarah Whitmore. Today, thanks to science, the truth has finally spoken. DNA, traces, and testimony all lead to one man, Jerry Burns." He presented the first images, the snow-covered Ford Pinto, faint yellow interior light, and Magnolia Woods crime scene map. "Here," Maybanks said, pointing to the enlarged photo, "we found the perpetrator's blood drop, a DNA sample preserved for 34 years. And here," he held up another paper, "that DNA matches absolutely with the sample from Jerry Burns' coffee straw in 2015. No room for coincidence." Defense attorney Leon Spies rose to counter. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a 1982 case. No witnesses, no cameras. All they have is a DNA sample in an abandoned car and a statement from a 6-hour interrogation. That statement was extracted when my client had no lawyer present. It cannot be considered a valid confession." He paced slowly, eyeing the courtroom. "Jerry Burns has lived over 60 years without a single crime. Could a man like that be a cold-blooded killer? I say no," the prosecutor replied calmly. "No one forced him to say, 'I left the body where no one could find it.' And no one but the killer could point to exactly where she was buried." He turned to Burns. 34 years of freedom cannot erase the bloodstains from that night. The trial continued with expert witnesses. The Hudson Forensics forensic expert displayed analysis results on screen, 2 parallel DNA strands, matching at 21 loci. "The probability of 2 random people matching at this level," she said, "is 1 in 100 billion. Scientifically, coincidence cannot exist." The jury fell silent. Some took notes. Others just stared at the graph on screen. Next was Detective Ryan Price, who had pursued the case since 2012. He recounted the journey: his father's USB, the genetic portrait, Burns' genealogy, then the coffee straw. "We had just one blood drop," he said, "but it guided us through 3 decades. He paused a beat, voice lowering. "No one can fake time." When it was Burns' turn, he took the stand, lean frame, soft voice. "I don't remember," he said. "I worked many places. Gloucester was just a name." The prosecutor played the interrogation audio, where Burns said, "If I tell you where she is, will anything change?" The entire gallery held its breath. Burns showed no reaction, just bowed his head, hands clenched tight. Spies tried to salvage. He was exhausted. An old man questioned for 6 hours straight, who wouldn't ramble. But then the prosecutor showed images of the abandoned wooden house by the Ipswich River, the exact spot Burns led them to, where the body was found. "Not rambling," Maybanks said. "That's memory." Closing arguments ended as the prosecutor turned back to the jury. 34 years. That's how long a killer lived in peace, while the victim lay in cold ground. DNA doesn't lie. Boot prints don't deceive. The only truth is Jerry Burns killed Sarah Whitmore. The defense replied succinctly. "We cannot imprison a man for life based on numbers alone. Remember, justice requires certainty, not belief." He glanced at Burns, but the man's eyes remained vacant. The jury retired to deliberate at noon. 3 hours later, they returned. "The air thick?" the judge asked. "Have you reached a verdict?" The foreman stood, voice firm. "We are unanimous. The defendant, Jerry Lynn Burns, is guilty of first-degree murder." The gavel struck wood, dry and final. Ryan bowed his head, eyes blurring. Prosecutor Maybanks exhaled long, then gripped his file tightly. In the spectator seats, some Gloucester residents burst into tears, embracing each other. The judge sentenced life without parole. Burns stood motionless, no reaction. As police escorted him from the room, he turned his head briefly to the window, where faint winter sunlight hit the white snow. No one knew what he thought, only that his shoulders trembled slightly. Outside the courthouse, Ryan pushed through the reporter crowd. Someone asked how he felt. He only said softly, "Justice is never late. It just needs someone who won't stop searching." Wind blew strong, carrying the distant toll of Gloucester's church bells. In the dimming, late-day light, light snow fell around the courthouse yard. A newspaper lay on a bench, bold headline spanning. 1982 cold case solved, justice for Sarah Whitmore. Ryan gazed at those words long, then lifted his head, eyes toward the north, where the Ipswich River flowed through the cold hills. He knew, finally, after 34 years, Sarah rested in peace, and Gloucester, for the first time, could sleep in true serenity. News of Jerry Lynn Burns' verdict spread faster than any Massachusetts winter gale. The next morning, every major paper ran the same headline: 1982 cold case closed, justice for Sarah Whitmore. Bold black print blanketed newsstands across Gloucester, Boston, and Salem. On TV stations, images of Burns escorted from court interleaved with Sarah's smiling photo in her 18-year-old choir uniform. 34 years later, the whole state finally heard the answer Gloucester had awaited. Residents flocked to the town center, where reporters set up cameras before City Hall. "I still remember the night that girl vanished," a silver-haired woman said, clutching her coffee cup. "We didn't let our daughters out alone for years, and that man lived among us for 30 years, shopping, buying gas, like nothing happened." Her voice trembled, mix of anger and relief. In the days that followed, Gloucester sank into mixed emotions. There were tears for justice finally served, but also chills realizing the killer wasn't a stranger, but an ordinary-looking man who'd been here, talked, smiled. Those who'd met Burns while he worked in Cape Ann in 1982 now couldn't forget his cold gray eyes. "We saw him," a mechanic said, "but no one imagined he carried a horror like that." The following week, Gloucester held a memorial for Sarah Whitmore at St. Anne's Church, where she'd sung Silent Night in her last Christmas concert. The service was, that Sunday afternoon, in pale golden light through stained glass windows. Over 400 attended, old residents, police, friends, even those who'd known her only from old photos. At the front, Sarah's portrait sat amid white flowers, beside a tall burning candle. As organ music swelled, Ryan Price stood silent in the back pew. He wore plain clothes, hat in hand, eyes on the pulpit where the pastor read prayers. Today, the pastor said, voice warm and low, we don't just remember a girl who left us, we remember faith, that truth never vanishes. It just waits to be found. Music rose, the song Sarah had sung that year. The choir's voices filled the ancient church, evoking the 1982 winter night. Many wept. Some elderly ex-officers in back pews bowed heads, including a few who'd searched with Paul Hensley for days back then. As the song ended, Ryan stepped forward to light a candle before the photo. He gently placed his hand on the wooden frame, whispered, we brought you home. Meanwhile, at the woods by the Ipswich River, where the body was found, people quietly brought flowers to lay. Some planted small flags, others wildflower wreaths. Earth and bloom scents mingled in the cold wind. Someone erected a simple wooden sign carved, in memory of Sarah Whitmore, 1964. 1982. She came home. Many couldn't believe the killer had lived free all those years, even passing streets where people still prayed for her. It makes us see the town differently, an elderly man said. Turns out, darkness isn't far away, it stood right beside us. Local schools held talks on the case, highlighting the importance of persistence in investigations and forensic science advances. Students read aloud the medical examiner director's famous quote, time does not destroy truth, it only preserves it. For Gloucester, the case's closure wasn't just an end to a crime, but testament to human perseverance. The small, quiet Atlantic coastal town now bore a scar, but one of healing. Each winter, people still laid white wreaths at the downtown memorial statue. Under snow, petals wilted slowly, but the brass plaque gleamed, she was found. Ryan continued at Gloucester PD, but rarely spoke of the case. Occasionally, he'd drive to the harbor, gaze toward Cape Ann Mall, where nightlights reflected on the sea, shimmering like sleepless memories. He thought of his father, of Detective Hensley, of years when justice seemed extinguished. If Dad were alive, he told a colleague, he'd just smile. On the last night of winter, sea wind blew through St. Anne's Church. The cross atop reflected moonlight, and in the rear cemetery, a new headstone stood amid ancient graves. It bore Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore's name. At bottom a small line, Ryan wrote, one drop of blood kept justice's promise. And in Gloucester, for the first time in 3 decades, the quiet air was no longer silence of fear, but true peace. Waves lapping rocks, soft as breath. Residents said they could hear something in the wind, not cries but faint, distant song, echoing from that Christmas concert long ago. Sarah's story closed not in pain, but truth. Gloucester, after 34 years, finally slept in peace. The Gloucester story reminds us of 3 very American things to cherish today: personal vigilance, community persistence, and science serving justice. Sarah vanished after choir crossing the dark Cape Ann Mall lot in winter, where cameras failed and parking was empty. In today's life, that's a specific reminder: choose spots near lights, go in groups, share locations with loved ones. Report immediately if you see a brown-jacketed stranger by a van like Rick Donahue once did. For public agencies, the broken camera detail is a real lesson. Require malls, schools, churches to regularly check security systems. This prevents tragedies more than just reacting after. The investigator's endurance, from Hensley, meticulously sealing box #82 Whitmore, to Alan Price, extracting STR in 2004, and Ryan Price matching the coffee straw at 21 Loshi, reminds every citizen of their role: store papers, photos, memories. Be ready witnesses, support budgets for local forensics labs. And as America debates genetic genealogy, the story highlights value and responsibility. Understand consent terms, protect privacy, but recognize tech reunites the lost. Finally, the smallest actions: call 911 early, note plates, walk with friends, check work cameras, add up to a blood drop, keeping the promise for community, no one forgotten. Thank you for joining us to the end of this 34-year journey to reclaim truth. A journey of faith that justice never vanishes, it just waits to be found. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to join us in exploring more true crime stories illuminated by time, technology, and perseverance. See you in the next video.